Welcome to the CHCH Newsmakers podcast. I'm your host, Rick Zamperin. A Canadian filmmaker is traveling across Canada and the U.S. to interview war veterans in an effort to preserve their stories before they're lost forever. He's interviewed dozens of war veterans in a project that has become a race against time. It's called Global Veteran Stories. Joining us on Newsmakers is the filmmaker behind it, Zach Dunn. Zach, thanks for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks again so much for having me on the show. Excited to chat with you.
Where did this idea for your Global Veteran Stories come from?
So it came about in 2021. I was cleaning out my parents' basement at the time, found an old box of photos and medals of my granddad. He served in World War II, found out later that he was a paratrooper, was in Africa, France, and Germany, and had this incredible career, but immigrated to Canada in the 1970s. He passed away when I was about 3.5 and never told a story. So I kind of thought to myself, there's got to be other veterans around his age that served and maybe haven't told their story before. And the idea just kind of came to mind. I grabbed my Amazon tripod and my iPhone and set off to try to interview as many veterans as I can. One veteran turned to over 160 from 18 allied countries, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to educate kids on this important history and be able to talk to so many incredible veterans.
That's amazing. Did you find out anything more about your grandfather?
I have, in the coming years, found out, again, he was in Northern Africa. He joined up right at 1939, right at 18, and he actually jumped on D-Day. So you picture someone who had this incredible career, 6 years of war, went in at 18, came out at 26, 27, but put the war behind him. But again, was injured on D-Day, was in Northern Africa. He has the France and Germany star, and he also served a couple of years after World War II in the Middle East. So pretty incredible to hear and learn about, something that's not too far away from me. I'm born in 1999. He was born in 1921. We're only about 70, 80 years away from this history, so it needs to be preserved. And I hope to kind of just be that messenger for these veterans.
So the learning about your grandfather way back when, fighting in the Second World War as a paratrooper, that ignited the passion to tell these stories. But how did you begin telling the stories? Where did you reach out? How did you find these veterans?
Yeah, the first one was, again, just kind of by random, to be honest with you. There was a TikTok or a newspaper reporter posted something on Remembrance Day for a 95-year-old World War II veteran named Arnold Graham, who lived in Lakefield, Ontario. And he was the youngest of 12, served in the Royal Canadian Air Force as a mid-upper gunner on a Lancaster and Wellington bombers. So I messaged the reporter and said, hey, would love to talk with him. This is a project I want to start. I hope he can be my first interview. Went over, drove to his house, and sat with him for about 45 minutes, brought my iPhone, started up a YouTube channel, and that's kind of how it all got kicked off.
How do you pitch this to war veterans? Because you've interviewed more than 160 of them. What is your sales pitch to them?
Yeah, I say, I'm a young man from Toronto. My granddad served in World War II. All of the footage, all of the information is all donated to schools and museums in Toronto and the US and also Europe as well. And I say, I'll give you a copy. I'll give your family a copy of this interview, and it's purely educational. It's a way for students and kids to hear your stories, because a lot of the times, they're in their 90s, they're over 100 years old, they're not able to go to schools anymore physically. I remember, growing up, a lot of veterans did have the opportunity to go to schools, talk at Remembrance Day ceremonies, and unfortunately that era or those veterans aren't able to do that, just because of their age. So I want to give kids that opportunity to, watch these videos. I think technology is a great tool for that in the classrooms. So again, I tell the veterans, I said, I'm going to come with, a simple camera. It's more of a conversation, and really just gonna want to learn more about you. It's just more of a sit-down conversation, and then again, it will be donated to various schools and museums. So usually that gets them pretty interested, and it's just more of a casual conversation. That's kind of my interview style.
You've also been doing this for, I think, I read about 5 years now, and you've gone or visited or interviewed veterans across the continent. Where have you gone?
Yeah, I mean, Ontario obviously is where I'm based. So I've been up to North Bay. I was in Kingston, Windsor, obviously the Hamilton, Stony Creek area, Waynfleet, Sudbury. I was out in Alberta last October. I was in Calgary and Edmonton for about a week. I've had the opportunity to travel to the US a few times, to Minnesota, Pittsburgh, and so on. But I think anytime that I can't travel, I really try to do these over Zoom, which has opened up the global part of the global veteran stories. I've interviewed veterans all the way in Australia, veterans in West Africa and Ghana, and Poland, again, India, the Middle East, the Netherlands, France, the UK, the list kind of goes on. So, again, those 18 countries, sometimes they're from, originally from those countries, but then they immigrate to Canada. But a lot of the times they're done over Zoom at whatever hour. The one in Ghana I did in December, I think that interview was at 5:30 a.m. and it was 10:30 a.m. at his time. But an incredible story, and again, one that we don't hear about too much. And again, the ones in Australia were pretty amazing as well, being that 12-hour time difference. But I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit, and I'm planning to go to Buffalo soon. There's a couple veterans out there, and yeah, try to travel as much as I can.
That's incredible. You mentioned Stony Creek. You interviewed a 93-year-old Korean War veteran by the name of George Charles. And what was that experience like?
It was incredible. Recently connected with the Korean War Veteran Association just in Burlington and the Hamilton area, and basically said what I was doing. George reached out to me over email, said I'm a 93-year-old Korean War veteran, would like to share his story. George was a little bit hesitant to share, but I'm so honored and so glad that he did. Never been interviewed. Again, the Korean War is over 70 years past, but George carried a lot of his experiences to this day. He had such a critical role. He was a radar operator in combat areas in Korea, served over a year there, and he mentioned saw some horrible things within combat, or just unfortunately the poverty of South Korea at that time. But what I've came to find is, and especially George said, the South Korean people are so grateful to the Canadians and to the Korean War veterans that served over there, that helped basically liberate their country and fought for them. So George was an incredible man, so humble, didn't want all the limelight, but truly deserves it, and is one of our few lasting Canadian heroes from the Korean War. And I was able to share his story, and hope to share as many as I can. But George is an incredible man.
Really is, and he's one of among many in the golden generation or the golden age in terms of leaving their homes or leaving their workplace or whatever the case was, their family situation, to go fight for the cause that they believed in. And none of them really want to take any credit. It was a team effort, or it was so and so who led the charge, really deflecting a lot of the kudos that they deserve. And I'm sure you hear this time and time again.
Absolutely. I think, they're labeled as the greatest generation, the quiet generation. I truly believe that they're the most humble individuals, that's still alive today. They don't want all the credit, even though they truly deserve it. And a lot of the times the veterans are hesitant for an interview because they say, well, I didn't really do much, or my story's not important. And I always say every story is important, no matter what you did, no matter what your role was on the home front or flying missions, or whatever you did. It was all part of a grander effort. And the fact that you joined up at such a young age, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, these kids were in high school, when the war started, and, they joined up. Sometimes they forged a signature, or they lied about their age, or, whatever the case may be. But again, they don't want to share their stories, but I think it's so important to, because there's so few of them left. And I feel that that history or connection is kind of slowly going away. That's why I think it's so important to show these in schools and museums. Growing up here in Canada and Toronto, I only had one history class in grade 10, and we didn't really cover much. I'm always very honest when I'm talking to the Korean War veterans. I said I didn't really know what the Korean War was until I met my first Korean War veteran, and he told me all about it, and I did a little bit more research. So I think that history is so important to pass on, but again, it's more the knowledge, the insight, the Just the experiences. I got married 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago yesterday, and I always ask veterans, what's the secret to such a long marriage or such a long life? And they always give me some great advice, stuff that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.
What are some of the things they've said?
Yeah, some great ones. William and Bill Parfit out of North Bay, Ontario. They were married for 77 years, and it's never go to bed angry, love each other, and make sure that you laugh every single day. So I think those are something I try to do and try to bring into my own marriage, to my beautiful loving wife. And yeah, some pretty incredible insights and advice that these men and women have.
Those are great tips. And you mentioned women as well. We just showed a clip of one of the female veterans that you've interviewed as well. What are some of the stories that they've shared?
Yeah, so I think the clip that you have there is Mary Owen. She was born in 1926 I believe it was just past Sudbury. And again, a lot of the same thing. My nanny also served in World War II. She was one of the younger ones. She joined up at 15, lying about her age, joining up at 18. And again, she was on, the Women's Auxiliary in England. But I think a lot of the time, the women don't want to share their stories. They say the same thing as the men. Their stories aren't important. They don't matter. And anytime I meet with them, I said, your story does matter. You joined up at a young age. You did your part. No matter what your job was, you were a veteran in my eyes. You're willing to do whatever you could, to save the country and yeah, do your part to end the war. Again, Mary Owen served on the East Coast. She had a top secret job, basically looking at radar equipment supporting the Battle of the Atlantic. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of women that joined who've never shared their story, and I've had the honor to interview about 25 Canadian or American or Dutch female World War II veterans, and it's been an absolute honor.
That's pretty cool. We're honoring women this week in our morning show, CHCH Morning Live, with Women's Health Week, and this is a great part of celebrating women in our world wars as well. Zach, I'm sure things have gotten at sometimes emotional as these veterans recount or recap some of their experiences. Have you encountered any of that?
Absolutely. One of my personal, stories that I'd like to share. Gordon Shotlander lived in Burlington for a number of years, but Jack C. Thomas out of Waynfleet, Ontario, his grandson ended up messaging me on TikTok after seeing one of my videos, and he was incredibly emotional during our interview. He was in the RCAF. He flew over 20 missions, and he was shot down during the Battle of Arnhem. Anyways, he jumped out, had to bail out, hurt his leg, ended up breaking a couple bones in his back. But him retelling that tragic moment of having to bail out of his plane that was on fire was incredibly emotional for him, because he's never opened up about his story, never been interviewed before. So that one was one that was really emotionally impactful. I think even Gordon Shotlander, for me, just the vividness, you can tell when he was explaining the story that he was reliving it. This is a World War II veteran, a British World War II veteran that landed on D-Day alongside the Canadians on Juno Beach. And he was so good at explaining the events, what he experienced, what he saw. That one was pretty emotional. And Bill Seyfried out of Guelph, Ontario, again, never been interviewed. He was at the Battle of Calais, and in August of 44 and September of 44, and that one was incredibly emotional. A lot of Canadians unfortunately passed away and died during that battle, and the casualty rate was very, very high. So he was very emotional during that, and he was just 18 years old. So I think we forget how young these veterans were, men and women who joined, and how much they had to grow up so quickly. And it's, I hope to, again, save as many stories as I can, because if they aren't told or they aren't shared, it's never going to be shared. And I hope to just kind of be that messenger. But a lot of them have been quite emotional. And it's sometimes hard to keep your composure as the interviewer, as you can tell. But it's been a great journey. And yeah, it's more of a conversation. It's the ebbs and flows. And even Tom Vance out of Port Colborne, 104 this July. He was a Spitfire pilot. Never never been interviewed, never told a story, and I was honored to be, one of the few people to be able to share it.
As we mentioned, you've interviewed over 160 war veterans from many countries around the world. Was there a story or two that shocked you that you didn't expect to hear?
Yeah, it's tough to pick a couple, or maybe just one. I think one of the more unique ones came out of my trip to Windsor. I was actually in Tilbury, and there's a World War II veteran, Dugan Cottenham. He was a wireless operator and an air gunner on a B-24 Liberator. And he actually flew missions in Burma or India. And again, that was something that was really unique. I think a lot of people think about, World War II, you think about Europe. I think this is an incredibly unique story, and many people don't know that obviously it's a world war, but Canadians were in every single theater. They were in the Pacific, they were in, India and the Middle East. We were in Africa, mostly all of Europe. And I think a lot of people don't really know too much about that. You talk about Northern Africa. So Dugan Cottenham really stands out. Aside from, some of the Canadians, the Ghana World War II veteran, Joseph Ashite Hammond, his 101st birthday is actually this month. But again, he was part of the Gold Coast, born and raised in Ghana, was one of the few black, soldiers that went to India and fought in Burma against the Japanese. So again, a story that you really don't hear too much about. And especially here in Canada, I think it's important to learn about these other stories, learn about these other perspectives, learn about these other cultures and what they went through. We're all connected in the same way. They all joined up at 17, 18. They all want to fight for a cause or an evil that they needed to defeat, and they all kind of did their part so bravely, with courage and dignity. So those are the couple that really stand out. But I could probably keep you for a couple hours because I got all these stories on the Rolodex here.
Where do these stories live? Once you've interviewed the war veteran, you've edited the piece, it's ready to be published, so to speak. Where does it go?
So it goes right on my YouTube channel and my website, globalveteranstories.com, as well as on my YouTube channel, Global Veteran Stories by Zach Dunn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, you name it. But again, all of the raw footage gets donated to schools and museums in Toronto, in the US, all for free. So yeah, the full length interviews get posted on my website and the write-ups as well on YouTube for everyone to watch and search up and learn about. And that's what I really wanted to do is, just post it on there. Anyone can search it, anyone can find it, and anyone can learn about this history. So globalveteranstories.com and Global Veteran Stories by Zach Dunn on YouTube and all your social media platforms.
What kind of feedback have you received, not only from the war veterans that you've interviewed and now are watching the videos that you've kind of released, but from schools, from students, from administrators? What is the feedback?
I think the feedback's been incredible, actually. I think there was a generational gap. I'll be 27 in this October, but I think even people a little bit older than me and whatever the case may be, but I think people a little bit younger than me are even more interested in learning about this incredible history and veterans and talking with them. So I'm not sure what that change was, but I'm finding now, talking and working with high schools and kids, that they're so interested. They want to learn more. They're sponges at this information, and they want to meet veterans. They want to talk with them. They want to ask them questions. So that's from the kind of the younger generation side. The veterans I've talked with, they have a lot of mixed feelings about it. Some of them are so incredibly positive. They are, say, wow, this was almost like not really therapy, but I've never shared this story before. Mm-hmm. And then their kids come in with their own reactions and saying, I never knew about that story, or I never even knew he was a veteran. And again, that happens a lot of the times with especially the Canadians. Anytime I interview them, that new story comes out, or that new piece of information that they never, ever would have known. And again, talking about the global side, the Australians, they did so much in World War II, and a lot of them never get talked about or never been interviewed. So I'm trying to, bring out their stories. And I think a lot of the Commonwealth veterans are so shy, they're so humble. At sharing their stories, even motion pictures and movies. I think there's a lot of great information about what the Americans did, which is incredible. But there's so many different countries that did their part, and a lot of the times they haven't shared their stories. Again, the Australians, the New Zealanders, people from India, in Africa. I mean, their stories are part of a grander mission. But the reactions from the veterans have always been positive. They again don't want the limelight, but they truly, truly deserve it.
Because of the age of these war veterans, you've listed a few numbers: 101, 103, 93. They're up there. This is truly, as I said earlier, a race against time. You're trying to get as many stories told before they ultimately pass away. What's on the to-do list? How many more veterans do you plan to speak to?
Yeah, as many as I can. Basically every weekend or every Saturday, I'm traveling. I was in Barrie. I interviewed 4 veterans out there. Again, Stony Creek last weekend. I'm planning to head up to London this weekend. There's a couple veterans out there. North Bay, I'm planning a trip in June, and then Buffalo in July with my wife there to go see some veterans. So I'm it's grateful. I'm honored, getting contacts all the time. And for me, it's a race against the clock. We don't have much time with these veterans left. The oldest World War II veteran I met was in Fort Erie, Ontario, Burdett Sisler, and he recently passed away a couple weeks before his 111th birthday. But I was able to interview him when he was 109 a couple years ago. But again, yeah, the veterans are getting up there in age. Their stories need to be shared. They need to be also encouraged to share their stories. As I mentioned before, they're so humbled. They don't want the limelight, but they truly deserve it. So, lots of veteran stories out there, and I hope to save as many as I can, but definitely a lot on the list for sure.
As a filmmaker, what has been the best part of this series for you?
I think just seeing the reaction from so many different generations of people. When you post it on Facebook, there's a different generation there. When you post it on TikTok, there's a different generation there. And a lot of the times, again, I get a lot of contacts from those social media platforms where I get a comment and say, hey, well, I think my great grandmother, my great grandfather is a veteran. Maybe you want to speak with them. And that's a lot of the times how these interviews get scheduled. It's the family members, or it's the long-term care home workers, or whoever, a good friend of theirs says, well, I think if my friend of mine is a veteran, he's this age, this is what he experienced. And then we end up connecting over email and scheduling that interview. So again, the reactions have been incredible, again, from the different generations, people that are, around my age, much younger, much older. I think they are yearning, or, looking for this positive kind of feedback, and again, listen to this history. That's the firsthand accounts. I think books and textbooks and documentaries are great for that, but you often don't find the firsthand accounts. My name is this. I was born here. This is what I experienced. This is what I saw. So that's what I'm trying to get out of this whole project. The firsthand accounts, what you experienced, what you saw, what you smelled. And that's, again, my interview style. And it's been a great journey.
Is this a full-time job for you? Or is this a side gig? Or are you just doing it for fun?
So a little bit of both. I think no, this is a passion project. Yeah. Something I do on my weekends, something I do on my early mornings, my off time. I do have a full-time job in sales, Monday to Friday, but again, this is something a passion project, something that I'm doing for free, and something I hope to continue for many, many years. It's already been 5 years, which is crazy to think. I started this when I was 21, 22, and again, I hope to do this for many, many years to come. And whether it's speaking events or talking with students, sharing these stories at different organizations or schools. But I think the main part is, we don't have a lot of time with these veterans. Their stories need to be written down, recorded. And what I'm doing isn't special. I hope there's 100 Zachs in the world that would do what I do in their own way or in their own country, whether it's, in Asia or in the Middle East or Europe, Africa, Australia. I hope there's a couple Zachs in every country that can do what I'm doing, that can talk with veterans, record their stories. Again, I don't have any fancy equipment. Here's the phone I film all my interviews with and a $20 mic and Amazon tripod. So yeah, I think it's a passion project. It's a project out of love. Again, all started because of my granddad, John Lionel Williams, who deserves the world. And I hope just to carry along his legacy and, again, the veterans from that era. But again, I hope even people listen to this now, I hope they can start their own project, whether it doesn't have to do anything with veterans, but just have passion and do something you love. And for me, this is one of the many things for sure.
I think I'm going to speak for many people who are going to be watching or listening to this, especially the veterans, their families, that you are doing something special. You're sharing special stories and experiences and a key moment in our lifetime, in our humanity, in terms of what these men and women went through and sacrificed and for the betterment of everyone around the globe. So thank you so much for doing what you do. And Zach, thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers podcast.
Thank you so much again for having me on the show and for reaching out. It was an honor. And anyone listening or watching Global Veteran Stories by Zach Dunn, if you know a veteran, family member, part of your community, feel free to reach out. Love to schedule an interview with them. And thank you so much again for having me on the show and giving me the opportunity to share these incredible veteran stories.
Amazing stuff. Zach, thank you so much. Have a great day.
All the best. Thanks to you, too. Bye.
All right. That is Zach Dunn, and that is a wrap for the Newsmakers podcast. A big thanks to the all-star cast behind the scenes. If you like today's episode, click the thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment as well. Catch the Newsmakers podcast on chch.com/podcasts and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.